The crunch of gravel under my tires sounded unusual today. Something just felt off. As my silver SUV rounded the final curve on Maple Ridge Road, I caught sight of what I always assumed was my family's farm. But it wasn't the farm I remembered. In place of golden wheat fields stood a towering concrete structure with windows that shone like 1,000 vigilant eyes. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The farm I'd known all my life had disappeared. Where the wheat once swayed in the breeze, a 3-story hotel now loomed, set among immaculate landscaping, pristine lawns, and an expansive parking lot. Neon yellow construction barriers enclosed the property, while workers in hard hats scurried about like busy ants. My mind raced with questions. How could this be? I'd been away for only a month on a crucial consulting job in Singapore that my family desperately needed. Sarah and I had gone over every detail before I left. We thought everything was secure. After all, our farm had been in the family for 4 generations, each acre treasured and meticulously cared for. A construction worker noticed me and walked over. "Can I help you?" he asked, clutching his clipboard under his arm. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling weak as jelly. "This is my family's property," I stated calmly but firmly. "I'm Richard Holloway." The worker shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you're the owner," he replied, clearly uncertain of what to do next. Before I could say another word, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah read, "Richard, emergency. Call me ASAP." Still, my eyes stayed fixed on the hotel, that alien structure emerging from my farmland. I walked closer, my boots crunching on what had once been rich, fertile soil. Every step felt like an intrusion. The hotel wasn't merely a building, it was a proclamation, a colossal concrete declaration that someone believed they had the right to claim what wasn't theirs. Near the entrance, a prominent sign caught my eye. It read, "Willowbrook Community Development, approved by HOA Board. Karen Reynolds." The name leapt out at me. As the project director, I began piecing things together. Karen, the HOA president who had always seen our farm as an inconvenience, the same woman who'd constantly complained about our unruly boundaries and bombarded us with letters about grass height and fence regulations. She had long coveted our land, and now this was her doing. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Nearby, a stack of papers sat on a table, drawing my curiosity. Construction permits, zoning documents, and official approval stamps. All the pages told a story I needed to decipher. One particular document stood out, a brief note on community improvement zones that struck me as dubious. Its language wasn't necessarily illegal, but it was undeniably calculated. The construction worker eyed me nervously. "Sir, you can't be here," he murmured, his voice lacking conviction. I turned and offered a smile that never quite reached my eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," I assured him. Driving back into town, my thoughts swirled with questions. How long had this been planned? What legal maneuvers had Karen employed? And, most importantly, how could I prove this was wrong? Meanwhile, Sarah's urgent text remained unanswered. I knew I had to gather every bit of information to understand what had happened while I was gone. This wasn't just a land dispute. It was a fight for justice and the preservation of our legacy. As I passed through Willowbrook, a billboard declared "Growing Together." The irony was palpable. Growing together seemed to mean taking without permission. Later, at a local coffee shop, I began scribbling notes, dates, observations, and questions. Every line brought me closer to piecing together the complex puzzle before me. The farm wasn't merely land, it was our history and our future. At that moment, the waitress refilled my coffee and asked, "Rough day?" I looked up and mustered a determined smile. "Just getting started," I replied. Little did Karen know I was gearing up to fight back, and I planned to do it smartly. Later, in the dusty confines of my barn, I discovered that the old file cabinet held more secrets than I'd ever imagined. Sunlight streamed through the wooden slats, illuminating swirling dust as I carefully removed a stack of yellowed documents my grandfather preserved with such care. My fingers traced the edges of antique property maps, each crease whispering stories of our family's deep connection to this land. I spread the documents across my workbench and began sorting through decades of paperwork. Most people would have discarded these long ago, but something always urged me to keep them. My grandfather was a meticulous man, always prepared for the unexpected, and now his careful record-keeping might be my only hope. The first document was a hand-drawn property map from 1952 with intricate pencil lines marking our farm's exact boundaries and handwritten notes in the margins. I recalled my grandfather's tales of fighting to keep this land during tough times. "Knowledge is your best weapon," he used to say, pointing to these very documents. As I examined them, a pattern began to emerge. The Homeowners Association hadn't materialized overnight. They had been slowly eroding individual property rights for years. I found old meeting minutes, letters, and legal notices that shed light on Karen Reynolds' long-standing ambitions. A worn, yellow envelope caught my attention. Inside were letters detailing a property dispute from decades past, revealing that the HOA had once tried the same tactic, claiming abandoned or underused land for community development. But someone had stopped them then, and the documents showed exactly how. I pulled out my phone and began photographing each page carefully. Although my hands were steady, my mind raced with urgency. Every page was a crucial piece of the puzzle. I knew that later, Sarah would help me organize them. She had an uncanny knack for spotting connections I might overlook. Suddenly, the barn felt different. These weren't just old papers anymore. They were evidence, weapons in a battle I never sought but was now determined to win. A noise outside made me pause. The crunch of gravel signaled someone was approaching. I quickly gathered the documents, my heart pounding. Peering through the small barn window, I saw a white SUV marked with HOA parking stickers pull up to the property line. Out stepped Karen Reynolds herself, her designer sunglasses reflecting the midday sun. She walked with a confident air of someone who believed she owned everything in sight. I watched silently from the shadows, knowing she couldn't see me. In the dim interior, she produced a clipboard, jotting notes and surveying the land as if cataloguing my property. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft earth where my wheat had grown just weeks before. In the background, the construction of the hotel, a monstrous concrete edifice, appeared utterly out of place in this rural setting. Then my phone buzzed again with a text from Marcus. "My lawyer found something interesting. Call me ASAP," it read. I knew I had to tread carefully. One wrong move could give Karen exactly what she wanted, a pretext to label me an unreasonable property owner. I had learned from my grandfather that patience was a strategy, not a weakness. My recent research had uncovered far more than mere property lines. I had unearthed a web of connections linking the HOA, local developers, and city council members. Each link was another thread in the intricate tapestry of local politics and land development. Karen finished her inspection and drove away, leaving nothing but dust and uncertainty behind. After a few minutes, I stepped out of the barn. The land now felt transformed, not just a peaceful farm, but a battleground. My next move had to be calculated. I needed more information and a stronger case. The documents in my hands were only the beginning. Somewhere among these pages lay the key to stopping Karen and the HOA's land grab. I glanced at the hotel rising in the distance. They might have thought they'd won, but they had no idea what was coming. Later, entering the community center felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I strode through its double doors with my leather briefcase loaded with neatly organized documents. Each page a weapon in the fight for my family's land. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows over a room filled with HOA board members and curious local residents. At the head of a long wooden table, Karen Reynolds exuded controlled authority in her impeccably pressed blazer and perfectly styled hair. She had always believed that rules were meant to be bent, not followed. I remembered how she'd cornered neighbors at previous meetings, her voice oozing a saccharine sweetness that barely concealed her true intentions. "I'd like to discuss the recent developments on my family's farmland," I began, my tone calm yet resolute. Instantly the room fell silent. Murmurs died away, replaced by a tangible electric tension. I laid out the first set of documents, old property maps from my grandfather's era, each one meticulously preserved and notarized. They clearly delineated boundary lines, easements, and historical land use agreements that predated the HOA by decades. As my fingers traced the faded lines, each one told a story of family history and legal protection. I noticed a slight twitch of Karen's eyebrow, a small gesture that said she knew she was on unstable ground. "These documents," I continued, "prove that the land on which this hotel now stands was never legally transferable without my explicit consent." Next, I presented a series of photographs, images of the farm from different years, each showing continuous maintenance, crop rotations, and active family involvement. Every time-stamped shot was like a nail in the HOA's coffin. A middle-aged woman in the back, Martha Thompson, a long-time fair-minded resident, leaned forward as she examined the evidence. Her expression shifted from curiosity to genuine concern, just as Karen tried to interject. "Mr. Davis, this isn't the time." "I'm not finished," I said firmly, but with control. Years of legal consulting had taught me the power of a measured response. I watched as several board members shifted uncomfortably. Then I unveiled a surprise, a detailed environmental impact assessment I had commissioned privately. It exposed critical flaws in the hotel's construction, drainage issues that threatened local water sources, and soil disruptions that violated county environmental guidelines. Every finding was backed by professional geological reports. Martha raised her hand. "Could you explain the environmental concerns?" she asked. I walked her through the technical details, simplifying complex concepts so everyone could understand. My aim wasn't to confuse, but to educate, and the room truly listened. Karen's face became a storm of emotions: anger, fear, desperation. She knew I wasn't merely challenging the hotel's construction. I was exposing a systematic pattern of overreach. "You can't simply seize land," I stated quietly. "This isn't just about a hotel. It's about respecting property rights, preserving a family legacy, and upholding community trust." A young board member, Justin, whom I recognized from previous meetings, leaned in closer. "We have some questions about the documentation," he said. I smiled. Questions meant they were truly engaged and understanding the gravity of what I was presenting. For the next hour, I methodically dismantled the HOA's case. Every document, every photograph, every legal reference built a stronger argument. I wasn't just defending my land, I was defending a principle. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a shift. Board members who had seemed dismissive now appeared genuinely concerned. Martha scribbled notes and Justin studied the environmental reports with genuine interest. Meanwhile, Karen's earlier confidence crumbled with every passing minute. When I finished, the room buzzed with possibility. I hadn't won yet, but I'd planted seeds of doubt that would eventually grow into serious questions about the HOA's actions. As the attendees began filing out, Martha approached me softly. "Those environmental reports are serious. I don't think the board fully understands what's happening. I nodded while gathering my documents. The real battle was only beginning. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows over the parking lot. My truck sat quietly, a reminder of the farm that awaited me. But something had changed. This was no longer just about land. It was about justice. Across the parking lot, I saw Karen watching me, her eyes blazing with a mix of hatred and fear. She knew I wasn't going to back down now, not ever. Just after breakfast that next day, old Mr. Henderson from the neighboring farm knocked on our door. His weathered hands trembled as he slid an aged manila envelope across our kitchen counter. "You'll want to see this," he whispered, his voice heavy with decades of secrets. Inside, faded photographs and handwritten notes recounted a story I never expected. Karen Reynolds wasn't merely targeting my farm, she had a long history of land grabs. The documents detailed manipulative tactics, backdoor deals, and a systematic scheme to acquire community land under the guise of neighborhood improvement. I felt Sarah's reassuring hand on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Carefully, I spread out the papers. These aren't just old documents. They're a roadmap to Karen's entire strategy. Mr. Henderson settled into a chair, his eyes distant. "She's been doing this for years," he murmured. "No one had ever dared stand up to her before." One photograph, an aerial view of Willowbrook from the late 1990s, particularly caught my attention. Red lines meticulously drawn on the map marked property boundaries, but something was off. They didn't match the official county records I'd been studying. "I remember when she first became HOA president," Mr. Henderson continued. "She promised to make our community better." But better for whom? I thought, as Sarah began making precise copies of the documents. Every page was potential evidence, every photograph a weapon in our legal arsenal. I noticed a young woman pass by our window. She looked familiar, someone I recognized from HOA meetings. She hesitated, cast a nervous glance at our house, and then hurried away. "Who was that?" I asked Sarah, but she had already noted the odd behavior. Mr. Henderson leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Some folks in the community have been talking. Not everyone supports Karen's plans, and many are scared. She sure makes life difficult for those who speak up." I meticulously mapped out the connections. Every document revealed a story of calculated manipulation, property rezoning, subtle boundary shifts, and mysterious permit approvals. Karen had been playing the long game, and my farm was only her latest target. "We need to be cautious," I told Sarah. "These documents are powerful, but we can't rush. One misstep, and she'll discredit everything." Just then, the phone rang, an unknown number. Sarah answered in a neutral tone. The brief, cryptic conversation ended with her saying, "Someone wants to meet you. Someone who knows more about Karen's past projects." Mr. Henderson's eyes twinkled. "Seems like the truth always finds a way out," he muttered. I organized the documents, each carefully slid into a clear plastic sleeve. Years of meticulous record-keeping were finally about to pay off. Karen believed she could simply take what she wanted, but she had no idea what was coming. Outside, a car slowly passed by our house, and through the window I caught sight of that same familiar woman, watching, waiting. But for what? I wondered aloud. Sarah squeezed my hand. "We're in this together." The documents before me were more than just paper. They were evidence of a systematic plan for land theft, proof that Karen Reynolds thought she was above the law, and most importantly, evidence that we were ready to fight back. Mr. Henderson rose to leave, but not before imparting one last piece of wisdom. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories. As he walked out, a single document slipped from his jacket, a final piece of the puzzle waiting to be discovered. The next day, I sorted through the pile of papers, old maps, and property records, weaving together a labyrinth of information that would become my weapon. Marcus Thompson, the lawyer I'd hired, sat across from me, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "These property lines are far more complicated than I initially believed," he murmured, tracing his finger along an aged surveyor's map. His voice mixed excitement with focus, and it filled me with hope. I recalled how Karen had always looked down on our family, her immaculate lawn, flawless HOA newsletter, and the way she strolled through the neighborhood like a queen surveying her realm. But even kingdoms can fall, and this one would collapse under its own hubris. Her pristine suits and manicured nails were a stark contrast to my worn work boots and calloused hands. Yet today, those very hands were set to become instruments of justice. Sarah brought in coffee and gently squeezed my shoulder, fully aware of what this battle meant for our family. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about our history and our legacy. Marcus then unveiled a series of old county records. "Look at this," he said, laying out 3 different maps from various decades. "There's something odd about the way these property boundaries have been documented over the years." I leaned in as he meticulously aligned the maps. Each told a different story, but together they revealed unexpected discrepancies, tiny shifts in property lines that most people would have missed. "The HOA didn't do their homework," Marcus whispered with a smile. "They assumed everything was straightforward, yet nothing in legal land disputes is ever simple. We spent hours poring over old property tax records, inheritance papers, and even decades-old correspondence between my grandfather and former county officials. Every document was a fragment of a complex puzzle." Suddenly, Marcus's phone pinged. He checked it carefully and looked up with a gleam in his eye. "The local historical society has just responded to my inquiry. They've uncovered some intriguing documents on land use in this region dating back to the 1940s. I reflected on Karen, how she always acted as if she owned everything: her perfect lawn, her immaculate HOA newsletter, and her air of regal entitlement as she roamed the neighborhood. But kingdoms can fall, and this one would crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. She never suspected what was about to unfold. In the distance, a phone began to ring. Marcus glanced at the caller ID and grinned. "It's from the county recorder's office," he announced. "They've uncovered something fascinating in the archives." I stared out the window, at the land that Karen had tried to seize. The fields where my family had toiled for generations now concealed a secret, a legal defense far more potent than any concrete hotel could ever be. "They underestimated us," I murmured. "And that's going to be their gravest mistake." Marcus closed his briefcase, meticulously slipping the papers into a secure folder. "We're not just battling over land," he said. "We're fighting for justice." After he left, dusk wrapped itself around the farm. In the distance, the hotel loomed, a monument to Karen's greed. But even monuments can crumble, and this one was destined to collapse soon. I sensed that our struggle was only beginning. Yet, for the first time in weeks, a feeling stirred within me reminiscent of the hope I'd felt when I first discovered the hotel. Suddenly, the phone rang from an unfamiliar number. A premonition whispered that this call would change everything. The dusty attic, my longtime sanctuary of memories, felt different today. Sunlight poured through a small circular window, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny narrators. With deliberate care, Sarah lifted an aged wooden box I'd never seen before, its worn edges and subtly tarnished brass hinges hinting at its history. "I discovered this behind your grandfather's filing cabinet," she explained, her voice blending excitement with caution. "There's something extraordinary about this box." I watched as she gently lifted the lid. Inside lay layers of meticulously preserved documents forming a mosaic of our family's past. Antique property deeds, faded photographs, and decades of correspondence assembled into a puzzle waiting to be unraveled. Grandfather was never merely a farmer. The first item we retrieved was an intricate property map, but it was far from ordinary. Delicate annotations in his neat handwriting filled every margin with notes hinting that our land was connected to something much larger than a simple farm. "Look at this," I murmured, following a red line that snaked along the map's edge. It linked our property to several neighboring plots, suggesting a sophisticated legal network. Minuscule symbols like coded messages punctuated specific spots. Sarah leaned in. "They look like surveyor marks, but they feel more deliberate." They truly were intentional. As we explored further, a pattern emerged. Grandfather had painstakingly recorded every interaction with local officials, every land survey, and every property transaction. It was as if he'd been gearing up for a battle yet to come. A yellowed letter from 1973 caught my eye, a letter addressed to the county land registry. Although the letterhead bore grandfather's name, its content defied all my expectations. The letter alluded to an ancient land trust, a legal construct so intricate that modern lawyers might struggle to decipher it. "This isn't merely a property deed," I murmured. "It's a legal safeguard." Then Sarah produced another document, a hand-drawn family tree that extended far beyond our immediate kin. Unfamiliar names were meticulously linked with dates and locations, creating a complex tapestry of land ownership. The most captivating element was a sealed envelope nestled at the bottom of the box. There was no return address, only a wax seal embossed with our family's initial in deep red. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, careful not to damage the aged paper within. The letter was penned in grandfather's unmistakable script. Every word was measured and deliberate. He detailed a legal protection he had established, a generations-old trust set to activate under certain conditions. Conditions that strikingly mirrored our current dispute with the HOA. "He knew," I whispered softly. Somehow, he had anticipated this moment. The letter revealed more than just legal protection. It hinted at a broader narrative about land rights, community development, and a long-standing dispute that predated the HOA. Every paragraph was artfully composed, offering just enough to spark curiosity without giving everything away. Noticing the change in my expression, Sarah asked, "What are you thinking?" I took a deep breath. These documents aren't solely about safeguarding our land. They're about exposing something far greater. A bundle of photographs tumbled from between the papers, overhead images of the land taken decades apart. They revealed subtle changes and boundary shifts that might go unnoticed by an untrained eye. It became clear that grandfather had been chronicling something, a trail of evidence potent enough to expose the HOA's current maneuvers. One photo showed Karen's family property decades ago, and the boundaries looked off, not overtly illegal, yet undeniably dubious. "We need Marcus to review these," I said as I carefully gathered the documents, "but we can't let Karen know we've uncovered them. Not just yet." Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Some secrets, I thought, are best left hidden. The rules of the game had shifted. The box seemed to murmur tales of defiance, of legal strategies, meticulously planned and waiting decades to be unleashed. Grandfather was more than a mere farmer. He had been a strategist, foreseeing a battle like this long before it ever occurred. Sarah squeezed my hand. "What's our next move?" I asked, scanning the documents as a quiet resolve settled over me. We made preparations for the following day. Sarah watched me, her eyes reflecting both concern and determination. Our local paper, the Willowbrook Herald, had been teasing a major story, and I sensed that today would be the turning point. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, piecing together every clue like a detective unraveling a convoluted mystery. Antique property maps, archival records, and communication logs became my arsenal. Each document recounted how the HOA, under the leadership of Karen Reynolds, had methodically attempted to seize our family's land. Then the phone rang. It was Jack Miller from the Willowbrook Herald. "We're ready to break the story," he declared, his voice brimming with excitement. "But caution is necessary. Karen won't take this lightly." I understood the risk. In small towns like ours, complications were inevitable. Everyone knew each other, shared histories, and Karen was a formidable presence. For years, she had bulldozed through community meetings, intimidated local business owners, and always secured her desires. Until now. Sarah prepared coffee, her hands steady even as her eyes remained fixed on me. "Are you certain about this?" she asked. It wasn't a question of doubt, but of support. She knew how much this land meant to our family. Just minutes after the newspaper hit the stands, the first call came in. Karen's voice was incisive, slicing through the line like a blade. "Do you think you can humiliate me?" she hissed. "I've been running this community for decades," she snapped. I maintained my composure. "I'm not here to disgrace anyone," I replied. "I'm simply safeguarding what is rightfully ours." Local coffee shops turned into forums of heated discussion as people who had once been too intimidated to speak began sharing their stories. At a gas station, Mr. Rodriguez, the owner of the small convenience store, approached me. "She tried the same thing with your property a decade ago," he murmured. I had lacked the courage to fight back then. Soon enough, the local TV station caught wind of the story. By afternoon, a young reporter named Emily Rodriguez stood outside our farm with a microphone in hand. "A local family is contesting the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she reported, accusing them of illegal land seizure and abuse of power. Karen's reaction was predictable. She convened an emergency HOA meeting and invited the media. I recognized her tactic. She wanted to control the narrative and paint me as a troublemaker. But this time, I was ready. Marcus, our attorney, arrived clutching a hefty folder. "They'll try to discredit you," he cautioned. "Prepare yourself for anything." The community center was packed. Those who had once nodded politely to Karen now regarded her with newfound skepticism. The balance of power was shifting, and she could feel it. "This is nothing but a baseless assault," Karen declared, her voice resonating through the hall. "This family is merely trying to derail our community's progress." Yet, for every charge she made, I had evidence. Property surveys from 1947, tax records, and maintenance logs. Each document served as a bulwark against her allegations. Sarah squeezed my hand in reassurance. Our teenage daughter, Emma, broadcast parts of the meeting live on social media. The community watched intently, discovering the truth. During a break, a local real estate agent approached us. "I've collaborated with the HOA for years," he said softly. "I always sensed something was amiss, though I never had proof." By evening, the story had spread beyond Willowbrook. Regional news networks began calling, and property rights organizations showed interest. What began as a local conflict was evolving into something much grander. Karen resorted to one final intimidation tactic. A legal notice arrived, threatening a countersuit. But it was feeble, filled with bluster and hollow threats. We both understood. As the sun set, bathing our farm in a golden glow, I realized that this battle was about more than land. It was about standing up to bullies, preserving a family legacy, and proving that one person armed with truth and determination could make a difference. The phone rang again. This time, it was an investigative reporter from a statewide news network. "We'd like to do an in-depth feature," she said. "Would you be willing to share your story?" I glanced at Sarah. She nodded, a gentle smile appearing. "Yes," I replied. "We're prepared." Little did we know this was only the beginning of a fight that would transform our community for the better. My fingers traced the faded lines of the property maps laid out on Marcus's conference table. That yellowed paper held more power than anyone could imagine. Every crease, every minuscule note whispered secrets of land rights far older than most county buildings. "Look here," Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible. His pointer drifted over a section I'd examined countless times before. A tiny symbol, scarcely larger than a pencil dot, caught my attention. It wasn't just a mark. It was a lifeline. Wetlands. One nearly imperceptible indicator that altered everything. The hotel that Karen and the HOA had brazenly erected was built right on a protected ecological zone. No permit in the world could salvage it now. Environmental regulations stood as unyielding as concrete barriers. Unyielding and relentless. I recalled the countless weekends I'd spent wandering this land with my grandfather. He would point out subtle shifts in the soil and the fragile ecosystem that most people never noticed. "Land tells its own stories," he used to say. "You only need to listen closely." Now those stories were poised to speak louder than ever. Inside the courtroom, Marcus unveiled a stack of documents, satellite images, geological surveys, water table reports, each page a potent weapon in our arsenal. The HOA had assumed they could bulldoze over our family farm, but they had gravely miscalculated. "They haven't done their homework," Marcus warned, his gaze locking with mine, a mix of professional resolve and personal commitment. He wasn't merely a lawyer. He was fighting for something far greater than a legal case. During our meeting, Sarah phoned. Her voice resonated with both excitement and caution. "The local environmental group wants to speak with us. They've been monitoring potential wetland violations in the area." Yet another unexpected ally was surfacing. I recalled Karen's earlier tactics, aggressive meetings, and doctored paperwork. Her bullying strategies had worked before, until they no longer did. She had treated community rules as mere suggestions, convinced her status granted her unlimited authority. But every power has its bounds, and those limits were about to collapse. Environmental regulations were explicit. Wetlands were not just arbitrary lines on a map. They were vibrant, living ecosystems safeguarded by state and federal laws that cared little for HOA presidents or their grandiose hotel projects. Marcus detailed the potential violations, each word another nail in the HOA's coffin. Fines could soar into the hundreds of thousands, mandatory restoration costs loomed, and even criminal charges for willfully breaking environmental laws were on the horizon. I retrieved my phone and showed Marcus the photos I'd taken over the years. Images capturing subtle shifts in the landscape, water patterns, and plant life that signaled a fragile ecological balance. This documentation made our case ironclad. "They didn't merely erect a hotel," I said softly. "They devastated an ecosystem." Mid-meeting, a courier arrived bearing another set of documents from the county's Geological Survey Department. Every page felt like an additional layer of armor in our legal defense. Marcus phoned an environmental law expert, and one confirmation after another reinforced our case. The hotel wasn't just an unauthorized structure. It was an environmental infraction waiting to be exposed. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "Check your email. You'll want to see this." Mysterious and intriguing, the email included aerial images that delineated the precise boundaries of the wetland area. Clearly, someone from inside the system was eager to help. Anonymous tips aren't mere cinematic cliches. They can be genuine lifelines. Sarah joined us with coffee and a bundle of community petition signatures. Neighbors who had once been silent now spoke up. The HOA's power was disintegrating, signature by signature. They assumed no one was watching, Marcus remarked as he spread the documents across the table. But everyone was watching. They merely needed someone to connect the dots. I thought about my grandfather and the generations of our family who had revered this land, understanding that true ownership wasn't about domination. It was about listening, recognizing the delicate balance between human ambition and environmental preservation. Karen had seen the land merely as an opportunity. We saw it as a responsibility. The pieces were coming together, not with dramatic explosions, but through deliberate, methodical precision. Every document, photograph, and scientific report was another brick removed from the HOA's fortress of arrogance. We weren't just fighting a legal battle. We were telling a story of community, of respect, and of the realization that some things matter more than concrete and profit margins. The turning point wasn't looming. It had arrived. My hands trembled as I stepped into the courtroom that morning. Months of preparation had culminated in this David versus Goliath confrontation that would decide the fate of my family's farm. The wooden benches groaned under tension, filled with local farmers, community members, and curious onlookers. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, her impeccably pressed blazer acting as a shield against the overwhelming evidence. She had always believed that rules applied to everyone except her. I watched as she adjusted her designer glasses, a nervous tick betraying her composure. Marcus leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm, we've got this." His confidence was the lifeline I desperately needed. Years of our family's legacy, generations of hard work, sweat, and dreams rested on this moment. The judge entered, her stern gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Judge Elizabeth Hartman was renowned for her no-nonsense demeanor. She had presided over countless land disputes. Yet something about our case set it apart. I saw it in the way she scrutinized the mountain of documents Marcus had painstakingly compiled. The court will now hear closing arguments in the matter of Johnson versus Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, the bailiff announced, his voice resonating in the silent room. Marcus stepped forward, his navy suit crisp and professional. "Your Honor, this case is more than a simple land dispute," he began. "It's about a systematic abuse of power, a calculated effort to appropriate a family's legacy through bureaucratic subterfuge." He laid out the evidence, property maps from my grandfather's era, preservation documents, and specific clauses from the original community covenant that the HOA had conveniently overlooked. Each document was a piece of a puzzle, exposing a broader web of corruption. Karen's lawyer tried to interject, but Judge Hartman silenced him with a piercing glance. I noted Karen's fingers tapping nervously against her leather portfolio. For the first time, a crack appeared in her normally impenetrable demeanor. "Ms. Reynolds," the judge addressed her directly, "can you explain why your organization proceeded with hotel construction without a comprehensive environmental impact study?" Karen's reply was swift and scripted. "We followed all standard procedures. The property was technically, Marcus interjected. "Your Honor, we possess evidence that contradicts that claim." He presented a series of emails, communications between Karen and local officials hinting at behind-the-scenes dealings. Each message depicted a calculated evasion of proper procedures. I recalled the nights Sarah and I spent poring over these documents, late-night research, meticulous cross-referencing, moments of both frustration and hope. Our entire lives had converged into this legal battle. A local environmentalist was summoned to testify. Her report disclosed significant ecosystem disturbances from the rushed hotel construction, rare plant species, and possible water table contamination. Each point was another nail in the HOA's coffin. Karen's composure began to falter. I saw beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Her once impeccable appearance now betrayed strain. The community members who had once feared her now observed with a blend of curiosity and mounting admiration for our persistence. The most striking moment came unexpectedly when an uneasy HOA board member took the stand. "I couldn't remain silent any longer," he confessed, his voice trembling. What she did was wrong. His testimony exposed internal dissent, revealing that Karen had acted without full board consent. Marcus's strategy was crystallizing. Witnesses testified and documents were scrutinized. The courtroom transformed into a stage for truth, each piece of evidence unraveling layers of deception. As the day wore on, I observed Karen, once so confident, now visibly uncertain. The woman who had always bulldozed through obstacles was facing her toughest challenge yet. Judge Hartman took her time, examining documents, posing incisive questions, and listening intently to every testimony. Her expression remained inscrutable, a true judicial poker face. The final moments drew near as the entire courtroom held its collective breath. One last document remained. Marcus approached the bench, his steps measured and deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, "this final piece of evidence will illustrate the full scope of the HOA's misconduct." Karen's lawyer rose to object, but everyone understood that this was the moment of truth. My hands trembled as I walked across the farm, not from fear, but from the weight of impending victory. Each step felt like a conversation with my grandfather, whose meticulous planning had protected our land for generations. Sarah joined me, her eyes scanning the slowly healing landscape. The ravaged wheat fields were already sprouting signs of new growth. Where the illegal hotel once stood, only the marks of its foundation remained, a vivid reminder of our struggle. Marcus had accomplished more than just winning a case. He had exposed a network of corrupt local officials who believed they could trample over family-owned properties. Karen's network was crumbling. 3 city council members had resigned, and investigations were spreading like wildfire. "They never anticipated a farmer fighting back," I muttered, scooping up a handful of soil. It felt transformed, no longer just dirt, but a symbol of resilience. Our community had evolved. Neighbors who once trembled before the HOA now stood with pride, sharing stories of their own struggles. Local media ran one feature after another on our battle, inspiring others to challenge unjust land seizures. But this was about more than victory. It was about safeguarding a legacy. My grandfather's meticulously maintained property records, preserved in those aged leather-bound journals, had become our secret weapon. Every carefully recorded boundary, every handwritten note on land use, held more power than any modern legal document. Karen wasn't finished yet. Her final look in the courtroom made it clear this was only the beginning. She had appealed, hinting at mysterious connections that might reopen our case. Yet we were ready. Every potential attack had a countermeasure. The farm was no longer just land. It was a statement, a message declaring that small landowners could rise against powerful entities, that diligent record-keeping and strong community backing could overcome corruption. As the sunset stained the sky, Sarah squeezed my hand. "We did it," she whispered. Still, we both knew that the real work was only beginning. In the distance, a hawk circled our land, a silent sentinel watching over our hard-won peace.